and a very warm welcome back this time. This is episode 2 of season 1 of the Health and Safety Digest, a special podcast by Astutis. And I'm your host, the digital content writer at Astutis, Toby Howell. And as I said last time, and as I will in the future, I am your guide into this voyage of health, safety, and environmental training. If you tuned in to episode 1, you'll know that season 1 of this podcast is tailored essentially to dissect the NEBOSH Diploma, or now known as the NEBOSH Diploma for Occupational Health and Safety Management Professionals. In episode 1, we answered a few questions, and in this episode, we will continue along that trend. The episode will focus on a series of questions including the difficulty of the diploma, the entry requirements, and whether it expires. And as ever, we would love even more of your questions, and we'll get into that at the end of the show. But let's not wait any longer. Let's talk to Bren and ask him directly, how difficult is the NEBOSH Diploma?
Well, it's pitched at honours degree level. The hours are less than you would spend on a 3-year degree programme, obviously, but the pitch is very much at honours degree level. I sat my NEBOSH Diploma back in the early 1990s, and as all of us more experienced folk like to say, it was so much harder back in my day.
Always was.
There were 5 modules back in my day. Anyway, I won't go too far back and go over that. But from my personal experience, somebody who did A levels, did a first degree, has done 2 master's degrees over my career as well. I would say the NEBOSH Diploma was the sternest assessment challenge that I've faced in my career. When I sat my diploma, like I said, so much harder back in those days. We did have 4 modules with 4 separate exams and a case study. And like I said, the 2 things that got me really were, one, just underestimating the sheer volume of material that I needed to cover in the time available. And I certainly underestimated that. And the other thing at the time was, they were 3-hour exams, handwritten exams, and I would really be struggling at the end of writing a 3-hour exam. Handwriting goes to pieces after about an hour. So the change of assessment methodologies obviously takes away that second consideration. And the fact that it's an open book exam, means that having to cram information into your short-term memory to retain it for exam purposes isn't a consideration really anymore. I think it's much more important that learners spend their time thinking about the content and relating it to their own experiences, to their own organisations, and joining it up, because that's very much the way the new assessment methodologies will work. They'll be given real world challenges to consider in the light of their own organisations, or simulation type tasks and scenarios, again to test their ability to apply the knowledge rather than just to recall facts and figures.
Off the challenge of it, can we speak now briefly about the entry requirements? Because obviously, we get quite a lot of questions regarding what is required, what do I need, all of these kinds of queries. Could we hit the nail on the head here finally and say, what are the entry requirements for the NEBOSH Diploma?
Yeah, again, there's no absolute prerequisites that would totally exclude you from being able to study. As we mentioned earlier, there is an assumption that you've got a good base level knowledge at NEBOSH General Certificate or equivalent level, and we won't be revisiting that content. The assumption is that you've got that in the bank already. The other consideration, particularly with international learners where English isn't the first language, is that those learners need a good level of written English, which can be more challenging than spoken English. So NEBOSH recommend IELTS level 7 or above in terms of the ability to cope with written English. But that would, in essence, be it. I think it's certainly useful for learners to have had some experience of studying at a higher level beforehand, and to have some idea of their own learning preferences and their own approaches to learning. But there's nothing there that would, the lack of which would exclude anybody from being able to enter the programme. But I think it's important that the learners recognise the Pitch's honours degree level does require the ability to handle significant volumes of information and to be able to process it, and to be able to theorise and to be able to relate theory to practice and so on. So there's a lot of thinking needs to be done.
Well, this is what I was going to briefly touch on there. Surely it's probably obvious, but there has to be a certain motivation and willingness to really go out there and learn, depending obviously on your learning method. If we're talking distance or online, that's more with the learner.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be a certain sense, a certain real willingness and motivation to go out and learn if you want to do this kind of qualification.
Yeah, definitely. I think motivation is critical. I think we obviously pay a lot of attention to learning preferences and to the ways that we present our learning materials, whether it's in the classroom or through a virtual delivery or through the design of our online course materials, which are designed for independent self-study. The reality of life is, everyone can learn if they're motivated enough to learn. We can work on things like understanding what works best for you and advice on research methodologies and other bits and pieces that you need to address throughout the programme. But you can't get away from the fact that it is a big course, even though it's been reduced. There are lots of very, very different sort of aspects of content across a range of subjects. I mentioned earlier, engineering subjects, psychology at an individual and organisational level, a lot of management theory. We manage health and safety using the same tools we use to manage everything else in business, basically. So you've got all of these different subject areas that all come together in health and safety management, and the learners got to be prepared to put in the effort to join all of that up and make sense of it. Not just in a way that's going to help them to pass the assessment and get the qualification, obviously, that's important. But this is a significant career. This is a career that's designed to keep people, real people, healthy and safe in the workplace. And if you're not willing to commit to a high level of study and your ongoing maintenance of your professional standards, then there's a very real danger that if you get it wrong, real people will suffer the consequences. So I think motivation is critical. I think that's probably the main thing that I would want from one of our learners. If a learner is motivated enough, has that ambition to succeed and obtain the qualification and get on this career path, and to take personal responsibility, for their own effort and their own learning, then we can usually find ways of working with them and supporting them to success.
Brenig, again, thank you ever so much for that. We'll be leaving it there for today on this episode of the Health and Safety Digest, but worry not, episode 3 will be dropping very shortly on all platforms. We're talking Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and now YouTube, where you can access the subtitles. And remember, if you'd like more information regarding the NEBOSH Diploma, check out our website, www.astutis.com, and it's got loads of fascinating information regarding the different learning methods, cost, and the duration of the course itself. But also, if you want some more in-depth visual content, check out our YouTube channel, and it's got a wide range of really fascinating videos there regarding all sorts of qualifications. Don't forget to follow all of our social platforms, Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn, for fascinating insight, announcements and other cool surprises regarding the NEBOSH Diploma, among other fascinating qualifications. And if you want your questions answered on this podcast in future episodes, please do email me, toby.howell@astutis.com. That's toby.howell@astutis.com, and I will get your queries answered by the people who make the course themselves. So until episode 3, thank you very much for listening. Remember to stay safe, and we'll speak to you very soon. Thank you.